My name is Raphael. I'm 34 years old, and up until 2 years ago, I worked as a cab driver. 4 years driving through the city, always on the graveyard shift, from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m., sometimes even later depending on how busy it was. I chose that schedule for one simple reason: I couldn't stand traffic. And at night, the city was mine. Empty streets, traffic lights blinking yellow, that feeling of being one of the few people still awake in the world. There was something freeing about it. My wife never really liked that schedule. She used to say I was missing the best parts of life by sleeping during the day and working while everyone else was resting. But I liked it. It was my rhythm. And the money was good, especially on weekends when the bars closed and everyone needed a ride home. I wasn't the type to make small talk with passengers. I kept the music low, kept the car clean, drove well. A 4.9 rating on the app for almost 2 years. Never had a serious problem with any passenger. A few annoying situations, nothing major. A drunk person here, someone in a bad mood there. Nothing that kept me up at night. Until that October night. I need to give you some context before I go on, because I think it's important for you to understand how that night started so that what happened next makes sense. I was going through a period of accumulated exhaustion. My youngest daughter had been born 2 months earlier, and even though I slept during the day, my sleep was fragmented. My wife took care of the baby at night, but we shared the apartment with my mother-in-law and the place was noisy at any hour. I'd come home from work in the morning, try to sleep, and sometimes I only managed 3 or 4 hours. That matters because on that specific night, I was more alert than usual. When you're tired, your senses sometimes go into survival mode. You notice details that would normally slip past you. It was a Wednesday, I think, or Thursday, a weeknight, either way, which meant low traffic. I'd done 3 rides since 10 p.m. It was almost 1 a.m. and I was thinking about doing one more and heading home early. That's when the request came in. Passenger name on the app, M. Costa. Rating, 4.6, which is reasonable. Pickup address, 47 Acacia Street. Destination, the International Airport. Fare, significant, given the distance. I accepted without thinking twice. Acacia Street was about 8 minutes from where I was. It was a middle-class residential street, older houses with front yards, the kind of street that seems quieter at night than it is during the day. I pulled up to number 47 and parked. Lights off inside the house. Nothing unusual. It was 1 a.m. I sent the standard message through the app. I'm here. I waited. 1 minute. 2 minutes. Nothing. I called the registered number. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I tried again. Same thing. I was already calculating how much longer I had before I could cancel without penalty when the front door opened. A man stepped out, middle-aged, I'd say around 50, maybe a little older. A dark suit, the formal kind, heavy fabric. A small carry-on bag, the type that fits in an overhead compartment. He walked with purpose, no rush, but no hesitation either. Like someone who already knows exactly what they're going to do. He opened the rear door and got in. He said nothing. No good evening. No confirmation of the destination. None of those basic acknowledgement gestures people normally make when getting into a car. He just got in and closed the door with a firmness that bordered on excessive. I said good evening, silence. I confirmed the destination out loud like I always do. Airport, right? Silence. I looked in the rearview mirror. He was staring out the window on his side, his profile turned toward the street. Expression completely neutral. Not irritated, not thoughtful, not tired. Neutral like a face that wasn't feeling anything. Fine, I thought. Some passengers don't want to talk. I prefer it that way myself. I turned on the GPS, put on some low instrumental music, and started driving. The first 10 minutes were in complete silence. I followed the GPS. He stared out the window. Normal, it happens. But at some point, maybe 12 or 13 minutes in, I started noticing something that bothered me. A small detail, the kind you can't say exactly when you noticed it, but that suddenly occupies your thoughts. He hadn't moved. Not once. He hadn't crossed his legs, hadn't shifted position, hadn't looked at his phone, hadn't adjusted his bag. He was in the exact same position as when he got in. Straight back, bag on his lap, hands on top of the bag, gaze fixed on the window. Try to do that right now. Stay completely still for 10 minutes. It's not natural. We move constantly. Small adjustments we don't even notice. He made none. I tried not to think about it. I chalked it up to fatigue and kept driving. Then he spoke. The voice was so unexpected after so much silence that I physically flinched. The kind of involuntary startle that makes your shoulder jump. He said, in a completely flat tone. No inflection, no urgency. You shouldn't have accepted this ride. I stayed quiet for a second, processing. Then I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. What do you mean? Silence. He turned back to the window as if he hadn't said anything. My first thought was that he was joking. Sometimes people do that. Some kind of dry humor that doesn't translate well in a car at 1 a.m. But the way he said it, there was no humor in it whatsoever. It was a statement, an observation, like he was informing me of something I needed to know. I kept driving, but my level of alertness had jumped several notches. About 25 minutes to the airport. I decided I was going to finish that ride, drop off the passenger and never think about it again. but my eyes kept going to the rearview mirror at a frequency that wasn't normal, and every time I looked he was in the same position, still staring out the window, until the time he wasn't. I looked in the rearview mirror and he was staring at me, directly, eyes on the mirror, looking at me, and this time his expression wasn't neutral. It was something I still have trouble describing precisely. It wasn't threatening, it wasn't angry. It was more like ... curiosity, like he was studying me. I immediately looked away, focused on the road, heart racing. That's when I decided to stop at the next gas station. I needed a second outside the car, needed to think, needed other people around. There was a station I knew about 3 kilometers ahead. I'd pull in under the pretense of needing gas, and I'd text my wife my location. While I was forming that plan in my head, he spoke again. "If you get out of this car, you'll regret it." The same voice as before, neutral, direct, emotionless, like he was reading an instruction out of a manual. My hands tightened on the wheel. I didn't respond. I kept looking forward, at the road, trying to breathe normally. I tried to calculate my options. I could stop anyway, shout for help, hit the emergency button on the app, but something paralyzed me. I don't know if it was fear. I don't know if it was that irrational freeze that sometimes happens when we're faced with something we don't understand. I kept driving. I picked up my phone with my right hand, keeping my left on the wheel, pretended to check the GPS. I actually opened WhatsApp and sent my location to my wife with a message. "I'm fine, but I've got a weird passenger. Keep an eye out." She was asleep. She didn't respond. The next few minutes were the longest of my life. I drove. He sat in the back seat, and the silence between us was so heavy I could hear my own breathing. I tried to convince myself everything was going to be fine, that he was just an eccentric, a disturbed type with no real danger behind him, that I'd drop him at the airport and that would be it. Then the gas station came into view. Without thinking, almost by instinct, I put on my turn signal and pulled in, stopped at a pump, engine running, hands on the wheel. I waited, waiting for him to say something, do something, do something. Nothing. Silence. Then, after maybe 2 minutes sitting there, I heard the sound I wasn't expecting, the rear door opening. I looked in the rearview mirror. He was getting out of the car, without saying a word, without taking his bag, without any explanation. He got out, closed the door with that same excessive firmness, and started walking. Not toward the station, not toward any building, toward the highway. He walked to the edge of the road and disappeared into the darkness beyond the station's lights. I watched until I couldn't see him anymore. After about 3 minutes sitting there, I realized I was trembling slightly. I picked up my phone and called the police. I explained what had happened as coherently as I could. They asked if I had been threatened. "Technically, no," I said. So they said they could send a unit to check the area, but there probably wasn't much they could do. I asked if I should touch the bag he'd left on the back seat. The officer on the line went quiet for a second and said, "Don't touch anything. Wait for us to arrive." The patrol car took 20 minutes. 2 officers, 1 young and 1 older. They asked me to open the car. One of them approached the bag carefully, examined the outside with a flashlight, then opened it. It was empty, completely empty. No clothes, no documents, no objects. A travel bag, the kind you'd bring to the airport, completely empty. Except for one thing. At the bottom of the bag, there was a photo printed on regular paper, the kind you print on a home printer. The photo was of me, taken from outside the car, through the driver's side window. I was reclined in my seat, eyes closed, clearly asleep. From the angle, it looked like the camera had been pressed against the outside of the glass. Someone had photographed me while I slept inside my own car, on some night before that one. And that man had been carrying that photo. The officers filed a report. They took the photo as evidence. Said they'd investigate. They never called me back. I spent the following days trying to remember every night I had napped in the car. I did that sometimes on a quiet street when traffic was dead. 10-15 minutes. There was no way of knowing when that photo had been taken. What I couldn't stop thinking about was this. That man knew I was going to accept that ride. He knew my car, knew my face, had my photo. The ride was requested by someone who had already been watching me, and he walked off into the middle of nowhere without taking what he'd brought, as if the goal had never been to reach the airport. The goal was something else. To this day, I don't know what. I stopped doing overnight shifts that same month. I sold the car 6 months later. My wife says I did the right thing. She's probably right. My name is Fernanda. I'm 29 years old, and this story happened when I was 22. It was a complicated period in my life. I had just gotten out of a long relationship. I was living alone for the first time, and money was tight. I needed a job that would work around my morning college schedule. That's how I ended up at a 24-hour laundromat. It wasn't a big or fancy place. It was the kind of establishment you find in working-class neighborhoods. 4 white-tiled walls, 16 washing machines lined up in a row, 6 dryers, a television mounted on one of the walls, fluorescent lighting. The kind of place that never closes because there's always someone who needs to do laundry in the middle of the night. My job was simple. Come in at 9 p.m., make sure the machines were running, help customers with any technical issues, keep the place clean, and monitor security. Leave at 6 a.m. I was usually the only employee on shift, which meant most of the time I was alone in a large, empty space. Most people would find that kind of work scary. I found it calming. I liked the silence. I liked having time to study between customers. I liked the strange but pleasant feeling of being the only person awake in an entire neighborhood. I became friendly with some of the regular customers, the night owls who always showed up at the same time, an old man who washed his sheets every Tuesday at 11 p.m., a young guy who said he worked at a restaurant and always came in smelling like grease around midnight, a young mother who brought enormous bags on Sundays. They were familiar faces. And that's exactly why I noticed when an unfamiliar face showed up. It was a Friday, maybe my second or third month on the job. Around 2 a.m. the place was completely empty. I was reading a book at the front counter when the door chime sounded, that electronic beep that announced any customer walking in. I looked up from my book. A woman had entered, I estimated mid-40s, maybe 50, long straight black hair falling over her shoulders. She wore a dark red long-sleeve blouse and black pants. She was carrying a large white plastic shopping bag, clearly heavy from the way it curved her arm. She walked straight to machine number 7, which was in the far corner of the laundromat. She didn't look at me, didn't say hello, didn't check whether other machines were available. She went directly to that specific machine as if she knew exactly where it was. She loaded the clothes, inserted the coins, and sat down in the plastic chair pressed against the wall beside the machine. Up to that point, completely normal. What caught my attention was what happened next. She didn't take out her phone. She didn't pull a book from her bag. She didn't look at the TV on the wall. She didn't do anything at all except stare fixedly at the machine as it spun. Her gaze was direct, barely blinking, like someone watching something that demands full attention. I observed her for a few minutes without doing anything. Customers do strange things at 2 a.m. I'd learned that early in that job. The full wash cycle lasted about 45 minutes. When it finished, she stood up, opened the machine, and took out the clothes, wet, and put them back in the plastic bag. No dryer, soaking wet clothes straight into the bag. I made a mental note of that and said nothing. Sometimes people have dryers at home, or a clothesline, or any number of other reasons not to use the establishment's dryers. She left without looking at me, without saying a single word. I'd forgotten about the whole thing within 2 days. The following Friday, at 2 a.m., the door chime sounded. I looked up. The same woman, dark red blouse, white bag, long black hair. She walked straight to machine 7, loaded the clothes, inserted the coins, sat down in the chair, stared at the machine spinning for 45 minutes, took out the wet clothes, put them in the bag, left. The repetition was what stuck with me this time. It could have been a coincidence, but there was something mechanical about her, like an absolutely established routine, executed without deviation, without variation. The third Friday, when she walked in and went straight to machine 7, I stopped pretending that was normal. I grabbed a small notebook I used to log machine maintenance issues and wrote, Friday, 2 a.m., same woman, same dark red blouse, same white bag, machine 7. Over the following weeks, I kept notes. She showed up for 5 consecutive Fridays, always at the same time, always the same way, always with the same expression of someone watching something that requires complete attention. She never arrived early, never late, never used a different machine, never dried her clothes. On the 6th week, I decided to start a conversation. I waited for her to sit down and walked over with my employee badge and my best friendly professional expression. I asked if everything was okay with the machine, if she needed any help. She turned her face toward me slowly. That slowly is important. It wasn't the quick, natural movement of someone who hears an unexpected voice. It was deliberate, as if turning her head required a conscious effort. She looked directly at me. Her eyes were dark, large, with something in them I couldn't name in that moment. Not hostility, not confusion. Something more like distance, as if she were looking at me through a vast stretch of something invisible. She said, "Can you see my clothes spinning?" I looked at the machine. The clothes were visibly spinning through the porthole. I said yes. She then said, in that same flat, distant voice, "I can't anymore." I stood there for a second, not knowing how to respond to that. It wasn't a complaint about the machine. It wasn't a grievance. It was a statement. It said with the gravity of someone communicating something very important. Before I could say anything, she turned her face back to the machine and went back to staring fixedly at the porthole. I returned to the counter with that phrase spinning in my head. When the cycle ended and she went to take out the wet clothes, I tried again. I said we had dryers available, that I could help her if she wanted. She didn't respond. She picked up her bag, walked past me without a glance, and left. The following week, she didn't show up. Neither the week after, nor the one after that. After a month without seeing her, I mentioned it to the laundromat's owner, a woman in her 60s who would sometimes stop by during the day to check on things. I described the woman, the dark red blouse, the black hair, machine 7. The time. The owner listened with an expression that grew progressively more serious. When I finished, she stayed quiet for a moment longer than was comfortable. Then she said that before I was hired, a little over a year earlier, a woman had collapsed inside the laundromat during the middle of the night, cardiac arrest. The paramedics were called but couldn't revive her. She had died right there, while waiting for her wash cycle to finish. It was a Friday. It was around 2 a.m., and the machine she had been using was number 7. I asked for her name. The owner said she couldn't remember exactly, but that the woman always wore a lot of black and red. That's what she remembered, because she'd found the color combination striking for such a warm night. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed on the job for another 2 months because I needed the money. The woman never came back. But every Friday, around 2 a.m., I'd keep an eye on the door. And every Friday, when the chime didn't sound at that specific time, I'd let out a breath of relief that I tried to pretend I wasn't letting out. I quit when I found another job. On my last day, I walked past machine 7 one final time. It was still empty, door closed. I put my hand on the glass porthole for a second. I don't really know why I did that. It just felt right. My name is Lucas. I'm 31 years old. I worked for 2 years as a night desk clerk at the Hotel Canastra, a mid-range hotel in the city center. It wasn't a luxury hotel, but it was clean, well-managed, and served a varied clientele: business travelers, tourists, families passing through. From 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., I was the only employee on the ground floor. I'll be honest, I liked the job. There was a certain peace to that shift. Foot traffic dropped off sharply after midnight, and I spent most of the early morning in silence, reading, studying, organizing files for the next day. The lobby was large and well lit, and I had full view of the hotel's cameras on a split screen behind the front desk. Hotel Canastra had 6 floors, 84 rooms, old structure, renovated in the 2000s, with that mix of modern and dated that mid-range hotels tend to have. The hallways were long and slightly curved, with dark red carpet and yellowish lighting that went unnoticed during the day but gave a slightly oppressive feel at night. The 6th floor was the quietest. Most of the time it was the least occupied by management's choice, since they preferred to fill the lower floors first. But during the week when everything happened, the 6th floor was completely blocked off for an electrical renovation. The electricians had worked during the day and would be back the following morning. There was absolutely no guest on that floor. I knew that for certain because I was the one who had updated the system before starting my shift. It was a Tuesday in November. I had arrived, checked in the last guests of the day, received the handover report from the previous shift, and settled behind the front desk with a cup of coffee and a book. Around midnight, foot traffic had stopped completely. At 12:47 a.m., the hotel management system generated an alert. Activity recorded. Room 600. I stared at the screen for a second with that strange feeling of seeing something that shouldn't be there. The system was precise. It logged any interaction with room equipment, door opening, keycard use, TV activation, minibar opening, air conditioning use, even the bathroom light, and it was telling me there was activity in room 601, on the 6th floor, on the closed floor. I went straight to the cameras. The split screen showed cameras from every hallway. I clicked on the 6th floor. The hallway appeared on screen at a slight downward angle, showing the entire length from the elevator to the far end. Empty, no movement. The emergency light was on, that low greenish glow, and the red carpet stretched as far as the camera could reach without a single presence. But the system kept going. New alerts coming in. TV activated in 601. Air conditioning in 601. Temperature set to 61 degrees Fahrenheit. Minibar opened in 601. I checked the cameras again. 6th floor hallway, empty. I called my on-call supervisor, a man named Rodrigo who lived about 15 minutes from the hotel. I explained the situation. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Probably a system glitch. The electricians might have knocked something loose during the day, but go check it out in person. Take your radio and the master key." I grabbed the radio, the master key, my flashlight, and headed to the elevator. The Hotel Canastra's elevator was old. Not frighteningly old, but the kind with a manually operated inner door, dark wood paneling, and that small oval mirror on the wall. Small, quiet, slightly claustrophobic. I got in and pressed the button for floor 6. The ride up took longer than it should have, but the elevator was slow. When the doors opened on the 6th floor, the cold was the first thing I noticed. Not the normal cold of an empty floor, a different kind of cold, more intense than the rest of the hotel, as if the temperature there was several degrees below the lobby. I remembered the alert, air conditioning set to 61 degrees, but even so it seemed excessive. The hallway stretched out before me in the greenish dimness of the emergency lighting. Complete silence. Not even the typical background noise a hotel always has. Muffled televisions, guest conversations, the distant hum of the elevator. Nothing. I started walking down the hallway. My footsteps on the carpet were almost silent, which paradoxically made the silence feel even heavier. I counted the doors. 601 was near the beginning of the hallway, the second door on the left. I stopped in front of it. Dark wood door, identical to every other one on the floor. The red light of the electronic key system blinked slowly, which was normal for an unoccupied room. I knocked 3 times, firmly. Hotel maintenance, silence. I used the master key. The system beeped and the light turned green. I pushed the door open. The room was empty, but not the way a room looks when it's never been used that night, like a room that was being used and is on pause. The television was on, not on any particular channel, just the blue screen of no signal, that uniform blue color older TVs display when there's no broadcast. Its glow lit the room in a cold, strange light. The air conditioning was running at full blast. I could feel the frigid air pouring from the vent. The room temperature was visibly low. I could see my breath form a faint mist when I exhaled, and the minibar was open, the door ajar, the interior light on, revealing an entirely empty compartment. No water bottles, no sodas, not even the standard items the hotel restocks between guests. Empty and open, light on. I turned off the television, closed the minibar, adjusted the air conditioning to shut off, left and closed the door. I went back to the lobby and reported to Rodrigo. Room empty. Equipment running for unknown reasons, likely a technical malfunction related to the day's electrical work. He agreed, told me to log it and that he'd call a technician in the morning. I went back to my book and my cold coffee. 37 minutes later, the system generated a new alert. Activity in 601. Television on. I went straight to the cameras, 6th floor hallway on screen. And this time, the camera showed me something different. The elevator doors were open. I could see clearly, on the camera positioned directly facing the elevator, that the doors were open and there was a figure inside, facing away from the camera. A person, standing inside the elevator with their back to the lens, not moving, not pressing any buttons, just standing there. I stared at the screen for a length of time I can't calculate. Could have been 10 seconds, could have been 2 minutes. The figure didn't move. The elevator didn't move. The doors stayed open. I picked up the radio to call Rodrigo again, but before pressing the button I thought, what if it's a guest who went to the wrong floor? What if it's someone from maintenance who stayed late? There were reasonable explanations, but one thing had no reasonable explanation. The elevator had gone up to the 6th floor without me calling it. I was on the ground floor. Nobody had requested the elevator from the front desk, and the cameras from the other floors showed nobody waiting. I decided to press the elevator call button at the front desk. If there was someone on the 6th floor who needed help, the elevator would come down and the doors would open for me on the ground floor. I pressed the button. I looked at the camera. The elevator doors on the 6th floor closed. The floor indicator started changing. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The doors opened on the ground floor. The elevator was empty. I immediately went to the 6th floor camera. The hallway was empty. The elevator was empty. No presence anywhere. Rodrigo stayed on the phone with me for the next 20 minutes while I went back through the camera recordings, trying to see where that person had gone. The cameras from the other floors showed empty hallways. The 6th floor fire exit camera, the only other way out besides the elevator, showed the door closed and undisturbed. The person had vanished, or had never existed. That night ended without further incidents. Rodrigo came in person before 4 a.m. and spent 2 hours checking the 6th floor. Every room, every corner, empty. The technician analyzed the camera system the next day and found no malfunction. That would explain the figure in the elevator. I stayed at that job for another 6 months. I never saw anything unexplainable again, but I also never looked comfortably at the 6th floor cameras after midnight again. There was something on that floor I didn't want to find again. My name is Carla, I'm 36 years old, and I've been a licensed practical nurse for 12 years. During 2 years early in my career, I worked overnight shifts at a municipal health clinic called UBS Santa Cruz, located in a peripheral neighborhood of a mid-sized city. Before I continue, I need you to understand what it's like to work at a small clinic at night. It's not a hospital. There's no ICU, no operating room, no permanent teams on rotation. It's a basic urgent care facility, capable of handling simple emergencies, cuts, uncontrolled hypertension, high fever, that kind of thing. Serious cases get stabilized and transferred. My shift was from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. From 7 p.m. until around midnight, there was steady foot traffic. After that, the clinic was empty for most nights. Me and the on-call physician. Sometimes the doctor would sleep in the break room between 1 and 5 a.m., and I'd stay awake monitoring the front desk. It was a small building, reception, 2 exam rooms, an observation room with 4 beds, a treatment room, an internal pharmacy and the bathrooms. A single main hallway connected everything, about 65 feet long with doors on both sides. White LED lighting, a bit too harsh for a place where people came to feel better. I liked the work. It was tiring, but there was that specific satisfaction of being useful to people in a difficult moment. The team was good. The on-call doctor was respectful and competent. It was the kind of job that stays with you. What I'm about to tell you happened on a Wednesday in June, almost a year into my time at that clinic. It was around 1:30 a.m. The last patient of the day had left about 40 minutes earlier. A child with a fever that the doctor had treated and discharged. Dr. Enrique had gone to rest. I was at the front desk finishing the day's records in the system. The hallway was empty and silent. All the lights were on because that was protocol, even without patients. That's when I heard the sound of a wheelchair. That distinctive squeaking of a wheel that needs oil, the kind of sound that anyone who has ever worked in a healthcare setting recognizes instantly. It came from the hallway. I looked up from the computer. I walked to the entrance of the hallway and looked. Empty. The exam room door was closed. No wheelchair in sight. We kept our 2 wheelchairs stored in a cabinet at the far end of the hallway, always locked away. I went back to the front desk. I figured it might have been a noise coming from the street or from a pipe in the building. Old structures make strange sounds. 10 minutes later, the sound came back. This time I moved faster. I reached the hallway entrance maybe 2 or 3 seconds after the sound stopped. The hallway was empty. Doors closed, but the lights at the far end, the last 2 in the corridor, were flickering. A slow, irregular flicker, like an LED that's about to fail. I went to check. They were the lights near the treatment room. The switch was in the on position, which meant the issue was in the bulb itself or the wiring. I made a note to report it to maintenance the next day. While I was back there checking the switch, I passed by the wheelchair cabinet. The door was closed, as always, but out of instinct I looked at the gap under the door. No light, no movement. I went back to the front desk. 20 minutes later, when I had almost convinced myself it was all just old building and unstable electrical, I heard the third sound, but this time it wasn't the wheelchair. It was different. It was the treatment room door, opening. I had my back to the hallway at that moment. I turned slowly, as if part of me didn't want to see what was behind me. The treatment room door was ajar, about 6 inches. I had checked that door less than 20 minutes earlier. It was closed. I walked over, pushed the door fully open. The room was empty, equipment in place, exam table empty, light off. The switch was just inside the entrance, on the right. My hand went automatically to the switch. I turned on the light. On the exam table there was something that hadn't been there 20 minutes ago. A patient chart, one of the old ones, yellowed paper, the kind the clinic used decades ago, long before everything went digital, folded in half, lying in the center of the table. I picked it up, opened it. It was a chart filled out by hand, with that doctor's handwriting that sometimes borders on illegible. The date at the top, March 14, 1987, patient name, Antonio Rodriguez, 67 years old, address 112 Goncalves Street. Reason for visit, intense chest pain radiating to the left arm, cold sweat. Working diagnosis, acute myocardial infarction. Treatment, attempted stabilization. Outcome, death at 2:37 a.m. I stood in the middle of that treatment room reading that chart for a long time, the hand holding it trembling slightly. I went to wake Dr. Enrique. He came downstairs, read the chart, was quiet for a good while. Then he said what I had already begun to suspect. The UBS Santa Cruz operated in a building that was much older than most people knew. In the 1980s and part of the 90s, that same space had housed a small municipal hospital, the Snow Lucas Charitable Hospital. It had been shut down due to lack of funding, and the building, after renovations, had become the clinic. In 1987, the hospital still existed, and according to the chart, Antonio Rodriguez had died there. Dr. Enrique said the chart had probably been sitting in a forgotten archive somewhere in the building and had fallen or been moved for some reason. It was the most reasonable explanation. I nodded because it was late and I was scared and I didn't want to argue. But I knew there was no archive in that room. I knew that room well. The story could have ended there, but it didn't. The following week, during my shift, an elderly woman came in with high blood pressure. In her mid-70s, a local resident, a regular visitor to our urgent care for blood pressure monitoring, a friendly and sharp woman, in good spirits despite her discomfort. While I was taking her blood pressure in the observation room, she looked out at the hallway through the slightly open door and said, in the casual tone of someone commenting on anything, "Who's that gentleman sitting out there?" I looked at the hallway. The waiting chair in the hallway was empty, completely empty. I asked her exactly where she was seeing someone. She pointed precisely to the chair closest to the treatment room, the second one in the row. She said it was an older man with white hair, wearing dark clothes, sitting with his hands in his lap. There was nobody there. I finished treating the woman, who was discharged shortly after. When she left, I stood alone in the hallway for a moment. I looked at the chair she had pointed to. It was identical to all the others. Faded blue plastic, metal legs. It sat directly across from the treatment room. I don't know if what that woman saw was real in the sense we normally give to that word. I don't know if the 1987 chart was there for a reason I'll never fully understand. What I do know is that I requested a transfer to a different clinic the following month, and that to this day, whenever I walk past any health clinic, I have the involuntary habit of looking at the hallway chairs before going inside. My name is Diego, I'm 28 years old, and I currently work at a logistics company. Day shift, which is exactly the opposite of what I was doing when this story happened. For 14 months I worked as a gas station attendant and cashier at a station off State Route 452, a highway that cuts through a predominantly rural area before reaching the city. The station was large and well equipped with a convenience store, to mechanics during the day, and basic tire service. At night, the operation shrank. Me and one other employee named Marcos, who handled internal maintenance and the convenience store. In practice, I was alone at the pumps and the register. From 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., the highway had a flow that dropped off gradually. From 10 p.m. until around midnight, there were trucks, commuters, the typical end-of-day traffic. After midnight, it could go 40-50 minutes without a single car. The kind of silence that initially feels pleasant and then starts to weigh on you in a way you can't quite describe. I created routines to keep my sanity. I'd reorganize the convenience store display when it was empty, sweep the lot, make coffee, check the cameras. Sometimes when Marcos was up front, we'd talk, but he had a habit of falling asleep in a chair in the back of the store after 1 a.m. So many nights I was without company. I'd never had a serious problem. A few drunk customers, one attempted drive-off I resolved quickly, nothing beyond the ordinary, until the first call. It was a Friday in August, around 2:10 a.m. The station was empty, the highway dead, Marcos asleep. I was behind the register doing what every night shift worker does when there's nothing to do, staring at the horizon thinking about nothing. The landline at the register rang. I picked up on the second ring, said the station name, like always. From the other end, silence. Not the silence of a bad connection, but the silence of someone who is listening and has chosen not to speak. I was about to speak again when the voice came through. Male mid-range, no distinct accent. The voice itself wasn't threatening, but the question was, how many employees are there right now? I didn't answer. My instinct was immediate. This is not a customer question. Customers ask about the price per gallon, whether tire service is available, whether the store is open. Nobody calls at 2 a.m. to ask how many people are at the station. I hung up. I went to wake Marcos and told him what had happened. He was more alert than I expected, got serious, said it was probably a drunk or some kind of bad taste prank. We stayed together for a while, then traffic stayed at 0 and he went back to his chair. 6 minutes later, the phone rang again. I knew it was the same call before I even answered. I picked up anyway, the same voice. And this time, no question, just a sentence, delivered with that flatness that wasn't calm. It was something else. You shouldn't have hung up. Click, the line went dead. I stood holding the phone for a second, then I called my manager. There was no formal protocol for this, but I needed someone to know what was happening. The manager, a man named Sergio, answered after several rings, clearly asleep. He listened to the report, said it was probably a prank call, but for me to keep an eye out and call again if anything else happened. That night there were no more calls, but the number stayed stored in the phone's memory, and when I checked it later, it was a number that didn't appear in any client or vendor list, a prepaid cell phone number. I tried to forget about it. With some effort I almost managed. The following Tuesday, 3 nights later, around 1:15 a.m., a car pulled into the lot. Dark car, large, a sedan model I couldn't quite identify in that lighting. It stopped at the farthest pump from the register, the one in the corner closest to the highway exit. I waited for the driver to get out or use the call button for service. Neither happened. The car sat there with the engine running. I could see the rear and part of the side, but the angle didn't let me see the driver clearly. 15 minutes. The car sat at the pump for 15 minutes without anyone getting out, without anyone asking for anything. Then the phone rang. I looked at the phone, looked at the car, looked at the phone again. I answered. Same voice. Beautiful night, isn't it? At that exact moment, the car's headlights flashed twice, once, twice, and the line went dead. I went to wake Marcos urgently. By the time we got back to the register, the car was gone. No sound. I hadn't heard the engine accelerate, just gone. The lot cameras, which I checked immediately after, showed the car leaving through the highway exit during the few seconds I'd spent in the back waking Marcos. I called Sergio again. This time he was more serious, that he'd call the police and for me and Marcos to stay together. The patrol car took 40 minutes to arrive, which on a highway at that hour is completely understandable. The officers checked the area, drove the highway in both directions, found nothing. One of them, before leaving, told me I should start writing down the times and descriptions of anything unusual. He said it with the tone of someone who knows the problem is going to continue. He was right. For 3 more weeks, irregularly but persistently, the calls kept coming. Not every night. Sometimes for days would pass with nothing, which almost convinced me it was over. Then the phone would ring in the middle of a quiet overnight and the voice would be there. Sometimes just silence. Sometimes a short sentence. On one of those nights it said, "Only are you safe?" in a tone that made absolutely clear the intent was the opposite of ensuring my safety. We had a recorder installed on the line at the police's suggestion. The recordings were poor quality, but they captured enough. The investigation was underway but without concrete results. The last call came on a Thursday in September, the coldest night of that month, around 2:30 a.m. The voice said one single thing: "Tomorrow morning you'll understand." I didn't sleep. When my shift ended at 6 a.m., I stayed at the station waiting for Sergio to arrive before going home. The day shift worker arrived first. He called me over the moment he got out of his car. There was an envelope taped to the back door of the station, the employee entrance. The back door, which was in an area the external cameras didn't cover adequately. Inside the envelope there was a printed sheet. It was the station's work schedule for the next 30 days, with my name highlighted on every single one of my shifts. My name, my hours, my section. Information that existed only in the station's internal system, accessible only to me, Sergio, and company management. Someone had obtained that schedule, and had spent the entire night telling me, in different ways, that they knew exactly when I would be there. I quit that same day. Sergio tried to talk me out of it, said he'd beef up security. that the cameras would be expanded, that the police had promised more frequent patrols. I listened respectfully and repeated that I was quitting. The investigation eventually identified the cell phone number as registered under false information, which is common in harassment and stalking cases. They never identified who was behind it. They never found out how someone had gained access to the internal schedule. I work days now, in an office with dozens of people around me. Sometimes, when the phone rings in the silence of a quieter afternoon, I still take a second longer than I should to answer. I think I always will.